All right, week 7 trades. We're talking buys and sells. Starting off, Marquise Brown. The news is that Kyler Murray is back at practice. So in the next 21 days, he will be back. He is a huge quarterback upgrade. Marquise Brown is the established number 1 on the team. He has a lot of unrealized air yards, and part of that is because of the quarterback play. He has 461 unrealized air yards, which is number 2 in the league. And he's a good player, man. And he's had a few games here and there, but his targets are there. His targets are there, and I'm chasing that, especially in a PPR. If you can get Marquise Brown at a discount, he's still like a wide receiver 2 for me, especially looking at if Kyler gets on the field. One thing I did want to show is some stats looking at team air yard share. This is the list sorted by team air yard share. And to me, these, for the most part, are elite guys that you really want on your team. You can see Marquise Brown here at 11 with 42.9% air yard share, which is huge. I think that will continue with Kyler at quarterback. And a lot of the guys we're going to talk about are going to be high in that air yard share. They're going to be high in unrealized air yards as well. And another thing to look at is the target share. 28%, pretty good for Marquise Brown. I think once Kyler gets back, he should be elite in that department. And, he has a lot of upside to me.
Yep, completely agree. Next up is going to be Mike Evans. So Mike Evans has a great remaining schedule, in my opinion. I'm not scared of really any of the matchups. Baker really likes throwing to Mike Evans. He's come out and commented on it. Evans has commented on it. They just have the chemistry. And what Baker likes to do is throw deep, and that is what Mike Evans is best at. They barely missed on a 92-yard touchdown in week 6, which obviously would have changed his outcome. And before he got injured against the Saints, he was on an absolute tear. And then he got injured, and then he had a bye week. So people kind of forget about him coming off the bye, and then he had kind of a so-so game. So this will probably be the cheapest you can get him all season. And I do think, he can return back to the form that he had the first 4 weeks where he was, averaging over 20 points a game. And he's already had his bye week. So you're not going to have to worry about a bye. He can be locked in your lineup for the rest of the season. And I love buying players that have already had their bye week because, you can count on them the rest of the year and you don't have to plan around him and have depth for his slot.
I mean, it's a free extra week of production. If you trade a player who hasn't had their bye yet for Mike Evans, then, you're getting an extra week out of that player. A lot of players have not had their byes yet, so take advantage of that while you can. I still see Mike Evans as elite. He's been so good this year, man, and he could have been even better. All right. Next up, a sell. George Pickens. He had a really good week before the bye, and the sell case is pretty obvious to me, and it's really main thing is Deontay Johnson coming back. Deontay Johnson gets a ton of targets, and that's not going to change. He's really good at earning targets, and he's just a good player. I think George Pickens has solidified a piece of this offense for sure, so he's not a panic sell to me, but I think if you can package him an upgrade to a receiver that you can trust on a weekly basis, I don't think George Pickens is going to provide that for you. I think he's going to be a little boom bust. Obviously, he can get the big touchdown sometimes, make the big plays, but if you can flip him for a Marquise Brown, even if you have to package somebody, that's such a good deal for me. I love doing deals like that. We don't trust the Steelers offense that much, the scheme, and obviously the quarterback play. As well as the coaching there. I don't like the situation in general. I don't want a ton of pieces. I like Deontay Johnson in a PPR league, but if you can capitalize off the big week, I would try to do that for George Pickens.
Yep. Next up is going to be kind of a combo, but we're going to talk about them separately. It's going to be Amari Cooper and Jerome Ford. That is 2 Cleveland Browns players. So they have a great schedule coming up. They've been through kind of a mini gauntlet. Our schedule goes, but coming up, they have the 3rd best strength of schedule for the rest of the season for running backs. They performed pretty admirably against the Niners, despite a backup quarterback and the weather. They still both came through. They both had over double-digit PPR fantasy points. Once they hit these easier matchups, I feel like both of these players will obviously perform better. I mean, when you go from playing the Titans run defense, the Niners run defense, to now playing some easier teams, Both have already had their bye, obviously, because they play for the same team. And like we discussed before, if you could trade someone that hasn't had their bye for someone that has already had their bye, you gain another week of production and advantage on your opponents. And then Amari Cooper currently is number 7 in unrealized air yards, despite playing 2 games with 2 backup quarterbacks and a bye week. So if you looked at per game numbers, he's probably even higher than number 7. He's probably top 5 in the NFL in air yards, that's what you want to target. You want to target those guys that are going downfield, that are getting the long balls, the deep balls. And I mean, Deshaun Watson's not going to miss the whole season, but their backup looks pretty admirable. PJ Walker, we've seen him support DJ Moore in the past for a couple games, so I don't think this quarterback situation is a complete detriment for Amari Cooper.
Yeah, and when Deshaun Watson does come back, it should be, based on what we've seen so far, it looks like it will be an improvement, so it should get better. And Amari Cooper, like you said, hasn't had the best stretch recently, so I would try to buy there. Talking a little bit more about Jerome Ford, so this is our first running back buy. Obviously, he's not an elite running back, and the reason we're telling you to buy is really just if you need to fill in an RB2 slot. I know a lot of people are dealing with injury or just running backs, just the position in general not being great. If you drafted like a Najee Harris or something like that, you're probably struggling. Jerome Ford can get you decent production, and I still see him as the lead guy. The reason you might be able to buy right now is because Kareem Hunt coming in and taking about half the work last week and getting the big touchdown means that some people could be worried about Jerome Ford. So I'm going to field offers, to buy him on the cheap just to see what I can get because running backs are so hard to come by. And their schedule has been hard. Like we talked about this, I think 3 weeks ago, that we knew their upcoming schedule was hard. Like we knew they were going to, have tough matchups. And so we expected a dip. If you combine that with the Kareem Hunt coming up, who I don't think is going to overtake his role, then I think you can scoop him up pretty cheap. I'm not paying up for him. But another thing to talk about is the upcoming schedule, like you mentioned, which is great. So if we look at the strength of schedule tool here, which does adjusted strength of schedule for the running back position, so adjusted based on their performance. And this is for running backs, and you can see Chargers have the best for running back schedule. Detroit is second, and the Cleveland Browns are third with plus 18.86% expected fantasy points over that schedule. You can see in the green here the percentages of what they expect over their average. So it's going to be a lot better as far as the schedule goes for Jerome Ford, and for that reason, I'm willing to try to buy him to see. There's not a lot of running backs to buy this week, so we'll talk about a little bit more running backs coming up though, and we'll talk about the hurt running backs. If you are a team who's winning and you can afford to buy a Devon Achane or Kyren Williams, James Conner, those guys, then yeah, you probably should, because there's a lot of teams that are going to need wins now, and if they lost their big players, they might need those wins. So on the flip side, though, if you need the wins now, then I'm cool making that move in the other direction, where I would sell a running back or even a wide receiver like Justin Jefferson who's hurt if you need the wins now. So that's totally situation dependent to me on those hurt guys.
Yep, I completely agree there. There's no point holding a hurt guy on IR that is going to miss 3 to 4 more weeks if you have to win now. If you're 1-5, 2-4, maybe even 3-3, depending on your league settings, then get what you can for these guys and take advantage of the people in your league that are 6-0, 5-1, or 4-2, and they're feeling great about their roster.
Yeah, like if you could go and get 80 to 85% of how you value a player, but they're going to get an extra 3-4 weeks of play, then I think it's worth it if you need the wins.
Yep. All right, so this is going to lead us into a running back that this is not a buy low on. I'm buying at cost, and that's going to be DeAndre Swift. So he's playing behind the best offensive line in football. He's looking absolutely great, and he's involved in the passing game, which is not something we've always been able to say about an Eagles running back. So he's getting the work. He's getting the important touches. He's getting the red zone touches. He's getting the passing work. And the majority of their games should be a positive game script for DeAndre Swift because they're projected to be winning a lot. They have a great defense. So I don't see his production going anywhere. He's currently the RB7, and that's despite him not even playing in week 1. So I think he can continue to be that throughout the season, and I think he's a top, 7 or 8 running back for the rest of the season. So he is something that someone I am targeting, and I'm not afraid to, pay up a little bit. For these running backs like this, you're going to have to pay a premium price because they are premium players and they make the biggest difference in fantasy.
Yeah, and he doesn't have the draft capital that I know a lot of people are attached to, but we're in week 7 now. I'm totally dropping that and just readjusting completely. So maybe he doesn't have the name value. Maybe it costs a little bit less than those other elite options. All right, another running back to talk about is Aaron Jones, who obviously has been dealing with injury, probably frustrating fantasy managers. He did have the big week 1, which is going to spike his price, but then he came back and had a pretty mediocre week. So if you can buy him off of that and just the concern maybe of a lingering injury, then again, there's not a lot of running backs, going to go around. So if you can scoop one up, if you can upgrade one of your pieces to get Aaron Jones, then yeah. As far as running back goes, these are really the only buys that, to talk about. Other than Jonathan Taylor, what are your thoughts on buying Jonathan Taylor right now?
So if you are going to trade for him, I think now is going to have to be the time you do it. I do think there's going to be a little bit of a rough patch ahead. His schedule isn't great. He plays, I know, the Saints and one other tough run defense within the next 2 weeks. And then it gets a little bit easier, and then he has a bye, and then he has a couple more tough matchups. But his playoff schedule, or the last 4 games of the year, isn't terrible. It's pretty favorable. I don't see Zack Moss being the lead running back for the Colts the rest of the season. Eventually, Jonathan Taylor will take that back over. They're wanting to ease him in, which is smart. Take it easy with him, that kind of stuff. You just paid him crap ton of money, so you don't want him to get injured right away. So if you're wanting to trade for Jonathan Taylor, now's the time to do it because he's played 2 games and he hasn't really put up the fantasy points that managers thought he was going to. So you can buy him cheap now and hope that you get a nice return on your investment. And at least you didn't have to hold him for 4 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's follow the money. Like, they paid him so much money that there's no way he doesn't get the lead role. And I obviously think he's a better player than Zack Moss. And to me, it's just a case of look what Zack Moss did in this offense. If he can get there, as far as obviously he's not going to get 100% of the work because I think Moss has established himself to have a role, but I think Jonathan Taylor can be more efficient if he gets fully integrated there. And Gardner Minshew being the full-time quarterback there isn't too bad. Obviously, sometimes not ideal, but maybe there could be more rushing touchdowns to go around for Taylor. I guess while we're on the subject, let's talk about Zack Moss and his, trade value. I think we're currently saying sell, or more so just field offers because you're not always going to be able to sell depending on the league. If the Jonathan Taylor owner doesn't have him and you got him, I would try to trade him as like a really, really, really good handcuff, situation. I would try to trade him to the Jonathan Taylor owner, but otherwise, just try to get what you can while he's had this. I mean, he's the RB6 on the year. I would try to, see what you can get because there's a chance that just based on his performance so far, maybe someone does think he's going to get half the work for the rest of the season, which I personally think is going to keep trending down.
I agree with that as well.
Okay, next up, let's talk about another buy. Let's go back to receiver and talk Brandon Aiyuk. Brandon Aiyuk has been a little bit disappointing the past couple weeks, but really there's still a lot to like when just what you see in the games. He seems to be the lead, target in that offense. Debo obviously dealing with injury, so that could help a little bit. He's got 30.8% target share on this team, and he's got a whopping 52.8% team air yard share, which is number 1. Like, over half of the air yards going to Brandon Aiyuk. He gets all the deep targets in this offense, and last week even had a bunch of unrealized yards. One of them, he just straight up dropped a deep touchdown, which I guess we can hopefully for his sake, say that was due to the wet ball situation with the rain. But, yeah, there's always going to be a ton of deep targets. And if we look at the schedule for him, to go back to this adjusted schedule thing, if I go over to receiver here and you sort it by the remaining schedule, number one by far with plus 22.53% average is the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of good matchups here, a lot of plus matchups for receivers. And I think Brandon Aiyuk is going to be able to take advantage of that the most. He's the most pure receiver in this offense. And another thing to talk about is the struggle that the 49ers had last week. So, the Browns did really well defending the 49ers. And part of that could have been, the weather. But I think a lot of it was due to the fact that they succeeded playing man against us, as well as obviously McCaffrey, Trent Williams, Debo going out. But they did well in man. So I wonder if other teams are going to go to man. And if they do, and it has a little bit of success against the Niners slowing us down, then you could see Brandon Aiyuk, just go ham because he is the man beater in this offense, and Kyle Shanahan would absolutely scheme him up a ton of targets.
Yep. And last but not least, that's going to bring a Christian Watson, who is our last bye. So you're probably been disappointed thus far with him. He missed the first 4 games, then he finally comes back, and I think he got like 10 points, and then immediately they have a bye week. And you're like, I just sat this dude out. But the good news is he already had a bye week. He never re-injured his hamstring, which is the big worry with hamstrings, is that when they come back, you re-injure them. So he hasn't re-injured anything, and he's already had his bye, which we've discussed previously in this video. You always want to buy players that have already had their bye because you gain an extra week. So I think him having that bye week this early in the season was actually a blessing in disguise, because it allowed him to get on the same page and really work through his chemistry with Jordan Love. Last year Jordan Love wasn't his quarterback, and then he missed, a lot of important reps early in the season via training camp and the first couple of weeks where Jordan Love was getting chemistry with these other receivers. Christian Watson wasn't there to get that. So I think him coming off his bye week and allowing them to work together through some things and get that chemistry up, I think will help him a lot. If you watch the film of the Raiders game, he was absolutely torching their DBs. He was open multiple times, what should have been multiple long touchdowns, but Jordan Love just missed them, or he was late on the throws or whatever. I think that will be corrected in the future, especially this week against Denver's porous defense. And I like Christian Watson's remaining schedule for the most part, and I think there's a lot more, upside left in him. I mean, look what he did last year. You don't just accidentally score 9 touchdowns and become one of the most efficient players ever. Not saying he'll get back to that efficiency because, he doesn't have future Hall of Famer Aaron Rodgers thrown to him. But I don't think he will stay at like a 10-point per game pace. I think he can be, an 18 to 20-point guy. We saw what Romeo Doubs and other weapons did the first 4 games without Watson. There's no reason to believe that he can't put up those kind of numbers.
Yeah, I agree. He has breakout upside. So you always like to add that to your team. And the cost right now to me is probably, I like the price at it. I would buy there. I guess another thing I want to talk about just before we close out the video is general trade strategies that I want your opinion on. So we talked about, I feel like, more receiver buys this week than we did running back buys, and we had a hard time coming up with running back buys that we're super confident in. Whereas receivers, I think there's a lot. And in the draft season, people talk about like 0 RB, and the theory is wide receivers score more than running backs, and especially in PPR formats. So in your flex, you typically want to play receivers, and running backs get hurt a lot, and they're it's not as deep as a position. So every week on the waiver we see running backs go down, and we see their backups, and you can pick up like a 10-point running back pretty much every week. It seems like just like a fill-in. So what are your thoughts on just like not even trying to fix the running back position, rather just selling what you have and just stack up on receiver? Like, I've been thinking about that. Like, if you're not having a ton of luck, like let's say you have some of these running backs on your team that are like average, like a Joe Mixon? Are you willing to like just sell that, because teams need running backs so bad, and just stack up on on wide receiver and just make that as elite as possible?
So it depends on the league, depends on the settings, depends on how many receivers can you play. I know in our main leagues
Right.
we can play 4 to 5 receivers at a time, but in a lot of people's leagues they can only play 3. So that's going to be a big deciding factor on if I do that or not. Because if you could play up to 5, because we have 3 receivers and 2 flexes, or 2 receivers and 2 flexes, so receivers are obviously going to be more valuable in that type of format. Then I would be fine with that, honestly. Running back's been kind of a crapshoot, and like you said, a lot of the main contributors have either been late round guys or guys picked up due to injury.
Mm-hmm.
The worry is that what happens if you do that, and not saying no one gets hurt because injuries are always going to happen, but no one that has a for sure backup gets hurt. Then what happens?
My thought is just that as long as you're like, let's say you swap a running back and receiver for running back and receiver, and you upgrade a receiver and you downgrade at running back, to me, I'm fine doing that just because the odds of the running back getting hurt are a lot more. So I tend to favor trades like that.
Absolutely. 9 times out of 10, if I'm in a vacuum, I'm going to favor the side of the trade that has the better receiver.
And that's the thing. Because the market is going to, like, when you're trading somebody, they're going to value the running back more. And when they probably shouldn't. And it's just because of scarcity. It's because they see on the waiver, the running backs look a lot worse than the receiver, right now, especially in PPR. So, yeah, I think that most people are going to value running backs more, but maybe you could take advantage of that is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's always good to zig when other people are zagging.
All right, yeah. So just throwing a little idea out there to get you guys started with some trades. So, yeah, we talked about a lot of trending, players and trades this week, so hopefully you guys can get something good done for your team. And, thank you guys for watching. We've been the Fantasy Bros, and we're out.